Hey, what's up, guys? This is Symbio with T3 Gaming, back again with another 2017 WizKids HeroClix Rules video. Another episode here of Meta Mechanics. The last one I did was based on the pack that they just released, and today we're going to go through the Core Rulebook, which they also released, along with the Comprehensive Rulebook, and we'll take a quick look at the sequence card that they also released too. Now, I'm not going to go through everything in the rulebook. I'm mainly focusing on the changes that I thought were interesting or significant, that maybe bring up some issues or concerns or discussion for the competitive game as well as casual play in general. We're all learning the new rules, so bear with me if I get something wrong. I'm going to give you my opinion on how things work, but of course, WizKids is going to probably, hopefully, come out with some clarifications on their rules forum. So we'll have to see how that goes. So we're going to go ahead and start with the core rulebook here, and you can go to heroclix.com/rules and download these. Also, definitely check out Tabletop Teacher on YouTube, as he's posting a bunch of supplemental videos on tutorials for newer players, and also just kind of going through the new rules as they are. So here we go on page 1. I have to first applaud WizKids on the rule books. They're excellent. They're very well done, pretty clearly laid out, and if anything, this is way more comprehensive than their 2012 rulebook, 2013 rulebook that they last released. I really like these black bubbles, which give you nice examples and clarifications that help answer questions, and it seems like they really tried their best to go through and cover a lot of corner case scenarios or questions that you might have. So take the time to read the book. There's obviously going to be cards and rules on, especially on old cards that are released before this rule book, that are just not going to be answered, and that's going to be something that's going to come up in the rules forum. So they do put a note here that says, note that individual cards can override specific rules in this rule book. That's part of the fun. Fun or frustration, depending on your perspective. But yes, so just keep that in mind, that even though these are the brand new rules, I mean, for the most part, I think they're going to try to, especially for the modern format, try to be consistent about how they rule on these rules. But there are going to be cards that they may choose to decide that that card is, in order to keep the power of that character or the ability for that character to do what it needs to do, they might allow that card to override it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, moving into the first item here. Well, we're not going to go through everything. We're going to go and scroll through. Basically went through and kind of highlighted things that I thought were interesting. The first area here is setting up and winning a game, and one thing that I thought that was cool is that they finally put in a sideline, and they defined what a sideline was, and they defined how many sideline elements that you had. They did have this in the forum, but this is not something that was in the 2012 rulebook as far as I was aware of, because ID cards weren't out, and even though there were like merge characters and so forth, there wasn't as many replacements, like shifting focus and that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. Sidelines are definitely going to be here to stay, and just keep in mind, we had a friend who played Deadpool and some other shifting focus stuff, and you could build up a lot of sideline characters. If you're playing a 300-point game, you are going to be limited to 9 characters on your sideline, and technically things like Supreme Intelligence, when he comes out as the Supreme Intelligence, as the if you're using him as a resource, that's considered a sideline too, as well as any ID card characters that you pick for that game. So you're maxed out at 9 on a 300-point game. So keep that in mind. You don't want to get TQ'd if you're playing a game with lots of shifting focus and that kind of thing. So, all right. So I thought that was interesting. Let's go ahead and move into this game setup area. They have a new kind of clarification here that was in terms of who places their characters and objects first, and I always wondered about this. There is some vagueness in the original rulebook, but they're very clear here. So obviously the first player still gets to go first, and the first player will also get to pick the map, and this is of course based on initiative roll. Second player gets to pick the side of the map to choose which side they're going to start on, and then the first player places all of their characters and any non-object game elements on the map, and then the second player does the same. And then the first player gets to place all of their objects on their starting force, and then the second player does the same. So there is no, I think at one point in time people were doing, because sometimes it's pretty important where your objects go, you would alternate, but that's not the case anymore. First player gets to place first, and the second player gets to place second. So it's nice to have that clearly outlined, and this is the kind of stuff that they do all throughout this rule book, is just kind of outline pretty clearly how things go. All right, so we're going to go to the next page here. Let's go down to page 7. We're going to go into cost actions, and I know this is pretty straightforward. You still got the move, close, range, power, and then now a free action. So that stuff doesn't really change that much. One of the things that is sort of is kind of controversial right now is this text here, which says immediately when given a cost and action, the character gets an action token. And I think that in a lot of ways this is cool, because I used to see players who would basically say, okay, I'm going to make a power action, and then they would put their token out and start counting out squares with their token, place the token down, and then move their character there, so that the token is given kind of right when the action happens, rather than like some people who will do all of their actions and then throw out tokens on their characters, which I never really liked, because it's hard to keep track that way. I definitely recommend the method of putting an action token as soon as you declare what you're going to do. I'm going to running shot, pulse wave. You put the token, and oftentimes you can use it to count out the square or place it where you think you're going to go. But remember that the token is just a marker that the action was given. I know it says here, immediately given a cost and action, the character gets an action token. I know there's some debate as to whether this is going to affect things like Green Arrow, Elseworlds Chase Green Arrow, because it says when he has one action token, he can't make a ranged combat attack. I think we have to think of this more as like the action token is given as a marker as part of the action. Even though it's given, they want you to give it immediately so you don't forget about it. It's not that he gets it immediately as part of the sequence of the action. So I think that the actions should still be able to resolve as if the action token was given after his action. So that's just my take on it. They very well may change that, but it would be pretty silly to make Chase Green Arrow totally useless, right? It's unlikely that they're going to do that. So just keep in mind, it's a good practice to get into, to give the action while you're right after you've declared it. So, all right, I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. Let's go into free actions here. Again, this is a brand new thing, because before this you could activate free actions, based on the controlling character could choose at the beginning of the game when to do free actions, and at the end of the game they could even do free actions after they cleared. So they're very specific now that free actions can only be activated during the action phase. So that's when nothing is resolving. So that's really important. Now, actions at no cost are some of the things that can be done at other points. They're the only thing that can kind of happen outside of the action phase. So just keep in mind, beginning of the turn phase is where certain things happen out besides actions, and then actions happen in the action phase. So it's very clear there. Here's where they talk about costed actions, or actions at no cost. And those are different than free actions. Free actions happen in the actions phase, and then they're clarifying here that the important distinction is that actions given at no cost always occur inside either other actions or special triggered effects. So I think that actions at no cost kind of allow you to do things. It kind of gives them an area to allow things to happen outside of the free action area. So, all right, another thing here is changing action types. So they point out here that some effects allow you to activate a power ability as a different action type than it was normally required. One of these examples is like Jean Grey Fast Forces. She gets to activate TK as a free action. And at one point in time, a judge had ruled that, or I think actually the WizKid, the Win ruling was that even though they were activating it as a free action, that it was still a power action. So, like for example, Felix Faust not being able to give power actions kept her from doing a free action TK, which I thought was just ridiculous. So now they're very clearly clarifying that any time that an action type is being changed, it's saying that if activated as the new action type, it is considered that action type instead for all effects. So now if you get to do something as a free action, it is now considered a free action rather than being a power action. Another point here is that, for example, if they're using an example of a special power says that Smoke Cloud as free, it means that your character can use Smoke Cloud, but you must activate it as a free action instead of a power action normally required to activate it. Another thing that point out here that they might do later, and they show this as an example, is if you had a special trait or something that said you can use Smoke Cloud as free, and then you also have Smoke Cloud on your dial at the same time, you can actually activate both of those as separate things, because Smoke Cloud is a free action and then the power action is separate, so you could actually use those both. That's probably going to be very rare if ever, but just something to point out that because they're different action types, they're different actions. So alright, we're moving into the action total of how many actions you get per game. They did set up a max here, and I think this is kind of also part of the fact that they're making the point values much smaller, and they're not really designing the game for like 1,000-point builds, that kind of thing. So the maximum number your starting action total can be is 10, regardless of your build total. So that is probably not going to come into play that much, especially for competitive play, but something interesting that I thought worth noting. All right, let's get into triggered effects. And this is great. Again, like most games, things done by Fantasy Flight, Pokemon, Magic, they are very clear about sequence, actions, what you can take, what are triggered effects, duration of triggered effects, and this is all stuff that HeroClix kind of new to HeroClix, because HeroClix didn't really outline the details of that. So it's really cool that they're doing this. I think for getting this game to go to a higher level, you need these kinds of very specific durations and rules. So here we go into the triggered effects. The part that I wanted to point out here is that right here it says other triggered effects use the words when, whenever, or each time, but aren't part of after resolution. So there are triggered effects that basically happen. They'll give you a duration or a trigger, like beginning of, or at the beginning of, or after resolutions. An example is that Chase Elseworlds green arrow will say something like hit characters. So hit characters is a triggered effect. So that is a kind of like a passive effect. And what I wanted to point out here is it says that these effects resolve instantly as soon as the appropriate event triggers them. So as soon as the event happens, they happen. Example is the green arrow Chase, just because we were talking about him. As soon as he hits that character, defense powers can't be used. So there's no other trigger. So as long as it doesn't have an after or whenever or when an after resolutions or something, then that's when it happens. So they give you a couple examples here. An example of another triggered effect would be when this character makes a close attack modified damage +1. Pretty straightforward, right? Anything that has a beginning of your turn is gonna give you a point in time in which the trigger happens. So all right, let's keep moving on here. Nothing really big here. I just wanted to kind of go through little bits here and there. There's definitely more as we move forward. Sorry, this is a little disorganized. Trying my best to keep this organized and help other people hopefully learn some of the nuances of the changes here. So the structure of a turn here they go through is, obviously beginning of the turn phase is a new thing, is because that's where no actions can happen. Action phase is next, and then that's where only actions can happen. And then end of turn phase is also its own phase, and then clear phase is its own phase. And I thought that was really nicely done because there was a lot of vagueness, before as to, especially in reference to beginning of the turn phase, and then clearing being a phase in and of itself, rather than being able to like clear tokens and then do free actions. So in the action phase here, it says that actions can only be activated in this phase when nothing is resolving, except those activated at no cost. So things that are activating at no cost can activate outside of the action phase. So that's kind of an important thing to realize. This clear phase is interesting because of Deadpool, the title, Mark with a Mouth Deadpool. They actually rewrote the title characters now to have a generalized title rule where if they've activated one of their title abilities, then they have to take an unavoidable damage. Deadpool, Mark with the Mouth, had some wording on it that said when clearing action tokens, and it didn't say clear phase, so there was a little bit of blurriness as to whether it was him clearing action tokens or the clear phase in general. So they're very specific here now that there is a clear phase, and when they refer to it as a clearing phase, or when you're clearing action tokens, that's considered the phase. And also it's important to point out that if you didn't clear action tokens, then that character cannot be considered to have cleared for any game effects. So a little vague there, but still important to point out. Okay, moving into this attacking area here. One thing that people always thought, was could I attack a wall and target a character and a wall? So whenever you're attacking, you have to always target a character. So that's a very important piece here that's specific to the rules, is that you can only attack a character. You can't attack a wall or any piece of terrain. You can use a destroy, basically, I think, what do they call it? A destroy action, close destroy action, or range destroy action, which are not attacks. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, moving on here. We're gonna just skip this part about close attacks. It just says, that you don't normally need to draw a line of fire to a target of a close attack, which is pretty straightforward. All right, so now we're gonna be moving into this area where this is determining hits. We talked already about how critical hits automatically make the target hit, and what I wanted to point out here is this keyword becomes. So when a character becomes the hit target, it says when this occurs, the affected characters automatically become whatever the effect specifies. So a good example is shape change. Is that if a character becomes hit through some effect, they cannot use shape change. And I just wanted to point that out. So you can't give somebody shape change and then, like for example, Bizarro Green Arrow, you could never give him shape change because he becomes the hit target. So anything that becomes the hit target is already the hit target. Another example is Chameleon, is when he rolls his die 6, he already becomes the hit target. So he doesn't get to use shape change after that. So this is not a new thing. I just thought it was cool that they actually used an example and pointed it out. And this is an example of like how they have basically taken all of these rulings. They've definitely been working on this for a very long time to try to come up with generalized rules that will work. Critical hit becomes a hit now, no matter what. So, or at least it still gets reducers and stuff, but you can't use super senses on it. So going down here into calculating damage dealt, I just wanted to put in here that they do specifically say that you can assign 0 damage to a hit target. So if you target 3 people, because you have 3 bolts and you have 4 damage, you can assign 3 to one, 1 to another, and 0 to the other, and the other is still considered a hit target. As far as I'm aware, and based on these wordings, you can assign 0 damage to a hit target. So if you could somehow, for example, we'll use Chase Green Arrow from Elseworlds. I think he only has 1 lightning bolt. But assuming he had more than one lightning bolt, or if you could give him extra lightning bolts, actually I think there's a new hammer or equipment coming out with Mighty Thor that gives you 2 lightning bolts. If you can give multiple bolts to him, then you can assign 0 damage to multiple characters that you hit and can't use their defenses. So that's pretty cool. All right. Just wanted to also point out here that they are very clear about damage dealt versus damage taken. So damage dealt is before reducers, dealing damage, and then damage taken is how much damage you take after reducers. So pretty straightforward there. Just cool that they pointed it out again. All right, going to the next page here. All right, so we're going to go into this area of damage types that they added. So there are really 3 default damage types, I guess. Well, actually, there is knockback damage, which they didn't put in here. But these are just, so it says by default damage dealt has no special properties. There are 3 types here. Penetrating damage, we all know, is damage that can't be reduced. Unavoidable damage is a type of damage dealt that can't be reduced or prevented from being dealt or taken by any effect. And this is interesting because it's a change from how they did things before a little bit. There was a ruling on Proteus, a UXM entity character, that said that he can only take damage from close attacks. And the Win Forum had ruled that even unavoidable damage, which Mystics was unavoidable damage prior to this, so he wouldn't be able to take Mystics damage. Of course, Mystics now is no longer unavoidable damage, it's penetrating damage, so that point is moot. But also they have a new wording in here called pushing damage, which I think pushing damage prior to this was also penetrating damage. No, it wasn't. It was unavoidable damage. But now they're calling it pushing damage. It's a type of damage dealt that can't be reduced or prevented from being dealt or taken by any effect, except one specifically mentioning pushing damage. So that's very specific about pushing damage. You can't get around it anyway unless there's some special power that says you can't ignore pushing damage, like willpower. All right, going down here into knockback. Knockback is going to be huge in the new game, I think. It's Quake has gotten some buffs, and then Super Strength now gives you knockback. So I think, prior to this, there was a Force Blast, which would give you some knockback. But now there's just a lot of ways to knock back characters, which is going to give you a lot more board control. I think cheap characters that have hypersonic super strength could be useful. Anybody that has Quake with a 3 or 4 damage, now you can do a single target Quake, and it's not locked at 2 anymore. You get to use your printed damage, and that just means more knockback squares. So, and not to mention that flyers now will take damage from elevation. So I think that just that's going to create a more exciting and thematic game. I think knockback was always fun. And what's cool here is now I'm just pointing out again that you may choose to knock back the hit characters. It is not something that you have to do. So even if you roll dice, doubles, you can choose to knock that person back or not. Of course, they can't be knocked back if they have charge or combat reflexes at the beginning of the action. But I thought that was really cool. All right, moving down into, I think here, sometimes it was a little unclear what the knockback path was, and they're very specific now about the knockback path. So if it's ever not horizontal or vertical, then you basically use a diagonal path closest to the estimated path. So if you take a look at this drawing here, if A was going to range combat B and roll doubles or something, it wouldn't go in the horizontal. You wouldn't come up with some generalized line. It would always be the diagonal that's closest to the target there. The other thing here to point out is that if you're resolving multiple characters getting knocked back, like a Quake, you always, and like if you have a Quake that's maybe 2 or 3 squares out, that kind of thing, then you would always resolve the knockback with the one farthest from the character causing the knockback. So just going in here again on knockback damage, if you hit a wall or the edge of a map or a higher elevation, you are still just taking 1 damage. And then also, if you fall, it doesn't say anything about flyers, and they could go back in and errata this. It could have been a mistake, but as far as what it's saying here with the knockback sequence, they get 2 damage if they fall off the ledge of an elevated terrain. So it doesn't matter whether they have flight or not. Of course, colossals and giant-sized characters cannot be knocked back. And I think multi-base characters cannot be knocked back either. So, all right, let's go ahead and go into knockback prevention. Effects that prevent a character from being placed also prevent a character from being knocked back. So if there's anything that prevents a character from being placed at all, I know there's a few characters. I can't think of any at the top of my head, but let me know, in the comments if you guys can think of somebody who can't be placed. That character, of course, doesn't get knocked back either. All right, moving on. Next, we have the golden and silver rules. And, it used to be that there was just like 2 or 3 rules. Now there's like golden rules and silver rules. So there's all these big rules, which, they're trying to use to generalize information. In some ways, it's almost a little too complicated. I mean, when we think about simplifying the game, this rule book, in a lot of ways, the core rule book shows you just how complex this game has become over the years, which is what makes it really fun, in my opinion. But okay, let's go down into the rule of minimums and maximums. So what I wanted to point out here is that if an effect the damage depletion modifier is not mentioned anywhere in the rule book, so I'm pretty sure that is gone. That was one of the gray areas, I think, of dealing with minimums and maximums, because if you had like modifiers on like perplex of a damage depletion modifier, what would get calculated first? What this is saying is that in all cases, all replacements, modifiers, increases and decreases continue to apply. Only the final result of a calculation is changed. So if an effect says that they have a minimum value of X or a maximum value of X, you do all the replacements, modifiers, and increases, and then only the final result of the calculation is whether it's a minimum or maximum. You don't take the minimum and then, calculate off of that. You do all your calculations and all your replacements, and then that's, if it falls below that minimum, you get the minimum. If it falls above that maximum, you get the maximum. You don't start with those values. So pretty sure that's what it's saying here. So let's just read it again. If an effect says that a value, often a combat value, has a maximum value, and the final result of calculating that value would be greater, use the maximum value instead. So yes. All right. And a lot of this is, I know, minutia. So, a little, again, new players, don't listen to this, don't watch this. It's going to be too confusing. Watch the Tabletop Teachers videos. But, if you've been playing for a while, you kind of want to get into these minutia, definitely. Hopefully this video is interesting or fascinating for you. All right, so another thing that they pointed out here in the golden rules is the rule of the active player. And this is something they used in the forums quite a bit, but it was never in the rule book. And basically it says that an active player is the player that is currently taking their turn, and usually whenever there's a disagreement or things resolve simultaneously, I guess not disagreement, because it has to happen where things are simultaneous, otherwise you're calling a judge. But if things are resolved simultaneously, the active player chooses the order in which to resolve those effects. So that's pretty important. So for example, like damage is assigned simultaneously. So the order in which the damage is resolved gets to happen based on what the active player decides to do. Alright, here you guys, we're going to go move into the silver rules, and the most important one that we want to talk about is the rule of zeros. Now, they actually released a errata correction to this rule book, and so I'm kind of coming back in here to edit this video and give you guys the updated information. But essentially, you can ignore the rule of zeros except for there's two parts that they're keeping, and that is the part where a character with a predicted range value of 0 can't make a ranged attack unless an effect replaces its range value with a number or gives it a minimum range value. They are removing the 0 speed and the 0 attack value. So those guys still get to attack, so please ignore that section. You can check the HeroClix.com /rules section for the errata there. And also, they are still keeping the character with a 0 passenger can't carry. So that's an important thing to note, that even like hypersonic speed, when they have a 0 passenger, they do not get the inherent carry ability. Any vehicle that has a 0 pilot still cannot carry. So ignore the black borderline box there too. Okay, so next here we have the rule of first turn immunity. And this has changed, at least the wording has changed. The actual effect is slightly different than the way it was before. But, ultimately the goal is to protect you from getting hurt or damaged or characters getting messed up the first round of game before you do anything. But what it's saying here is after the beginning of the game phase, so obviously no actions can happen at the beginning of the game phase, but they just want to protect that. And then until each player has finished their first turn. So that means both players have to finish their first turn. So during that time, they can't be moved, placed, damaged, or targeted by the effects of opposing game elements. The only caveat to that is leaving your starting area. So if you're the first player and you leave your starting area, of course, you can get attacked. But if you stay in your starting area, now you can perplex up, you can, basically do anything. Now, there's not a whole lot you can do because you're not going to be attacking the other opponent, but there are things you can do, like you can give power actions to generate bystander tokens, for example. So then and basically it's specific to the characters. So if one of them leaves the starting area, like you generate a Gertrude generates an Old Lace and that character goes out, Old Lace goes out. Old Lace can be targeted because she's left the starting area, but Gertrude cannot, even if she was given the power action. And that is a new feature. In the previous wording, if you were basically perplexed up or given any kind of action, you were no longer part of the first round immunity. So the other piece here is that they talk about how during game setup some characters start outside of the starting area, and these are like the KC characters. It basically says that once a character leaves the starting area or square, it's considered that square. As long as it stays on that square, they will be protected, as that's considered their starting area, that square that they're in. So that's kind of cool too. At least KC figures, in the previous first round immunity, they were protected too because they weren't given any actions. So not a whole lot different there. Okay, moving on to the next page here. We did have some new terrain. Where is that? Yes, okay. So we've got obscuring terrain. This is a brand new kind of terrain that they're just now talking about. It's obviously going to be some kind of foggy, steamy, dark terrain that just obscures vision because it basically it's hindering terrain for line of fire, but does not impede movement. So this will be kind of cool to see. Another piece of terrain that they've created are, let's go in here, I didn't highlight it, but windows. Windows are actually new terrain. We had a Civil War map that had glass, I think it was glass walls? And glass walls previously were like the dotted orange walls, and they didn't block line of fire in any way. And after an attack or a ranged attack resolved, you could destroy those walls or windows. But these windows are actually different, and I don't think they haven't released any maps as far as I'm aware of that have windows. Let me know in the comments if you guys can think of one that has actual windows. But they are considered walls. They don't impede line of fire in any way, so you can still outwit through them. You can perplex through them, that kind of thing, but you still have to destroy them as if they're walls. So they're different than those glass walls that we were looking at in the Civil War map. So you still have to destroy them with a destroy, blocking terrain action. So they do have doors mentioned here. Doors were actually in the UN convention, I think conference center map, and maybe a couple other ones where you can move through the doors, but they do block line of fire. So and I think that they also can be destroyed. So doors are considered walls and blocking terrain for all effects, including destroying it. So going into a little bit about markers here. Markers are like special terrain markers. They can be anything from like hindering markers, debris markers, water markers, and essentially they're probably going to release other things like clear markers. Debris markers are, destroy blocking terrain. Clear markers are, I guess, kind of like maybe special terrain where it creates a clear marker. But I thought what was interesting here is that it says if multiple terrain markers in a square, like smoke cloud markers, you can't put barrier markers on top of any other markers, but if there are other markers, the most recently placed terrain marker determines what type of terrain it is. So not that applicable right now, but as we get to be placing more terrain markers on the board, that could be very important. All right, going into blocking terrain and destroying it, again, they've created these two new actions, close destroy action and range destroy action. So you can't use this with hypersonic speed anymore because it is a close destroy action, not just a close attack or ranged attack. You can do it as a close action, as you can see with the uppercase or range action. You still need 3 damage or more, and of course you still have to target on the square behind the wall for a wall, and you have to target the center of the block in order to destroy blocking. Wanted to point out here that this, I think, is kind of new. I think this is new. I'm not entirely sure, but I thought it was cool they pointed this out. Is that for a close destroy, you can't destroy a diagonal wall. You have to destroy the one that's on the edge of the square you're occupying. And we'll go through like the move through destroying blocking later, but in case I miss it later, if you move through blocking and destroy it afterwards, now if you go through an intersection, you can only pick one of those walls. You can't destroy. I think before, at least as far as I was aware, if you went through an intersection, you would destroy both walls, and now you have to pick one. All right, moving on. Let's see. We did rule zeros. I know it's a lot to go through. Here we're talking about elevation and line of fire. Not a lot has changed here. So this is, I wanted to point this out just because recently, at Worlds we had this come up, and the judge there actually ruled it wrong. I don't know how many of you guys have watched the video between Matty G and Easton Brock, 2 super awesome players and really nice guys. Matty G had his Felix Faust standing in front of his PIM tank on an elevated terrain, and Easton Brock was shooting them with a Cosmic Spidey who ignores pretty much everything except for characters. So when he shot at the PIM tank, somebody in the audience had called out, hey, that wasn't a legal shot because he doesn't ignore characters. And so they actually ruled it against him. Yeah, he couldn't make that shot, and then he had to take the whole thing. He didn't get to take it back, and it was kind of a pretty controversial issue because although it didn't maybe change the game outcome that much, although getting those points and being able to run and would have helped him. In the end, actually, we figured out, thanks to one of the UK HeroClix community members from, I think, Agents of Clicks, Chris Dunn, he pointed out that because of the elevation, the character doesn't block line of fire because it's essentially as if he's shooting through the floor and hitting the character behind the character. So they actually pointed out here, and it's a very rare scenario, but it does happen. Like if you have somebody who ignores elevation and there are characters in front of him, you can still shoot the character behind him. And you might think the character is in the way, but they are not. It says here, notably, a line of fire between characters or squares on different elevations are not blocked by normal or tiny characters. Of course, I guess if it's a giant-sized character and you're on the lower, and you're trying to shoot down, then that would block. But if it's a normal sized character and you're on the second floor and you're trying to shoot down through the floor and you ignore elevated, it does not block. So sorry that's a little winded, but I thought that was a really interesting ruling and one of those things you don't use very often. But as somebody who, if like Nick Fury or anybody who can target through elevated terrain, you can definitely use that to your advantage because people might think that they're protected by that character when they're really not. All right, next going into objects. Objects have changed quite a bit. They no longer are hindering for movement whatsoever. So they will never block movement. And actually they specifically say that objects here don't block movement or line of fire in any way, except for heavy objects. So a heavy object allows you to still gain stealth, and it does create a line of fire that's blocked, or it's a hindered line of fire. So this is any heavy object. Has to be a heavy object though. So light objects do not give you hindering anymore. So that's pretty big change, I think. Another big change with objects here is that before you could only have, you would have to have one of each, like heavy or light. And of course, just to clarify, ultralights and ultra heavies are no longer legal in modern play, and they're not part of the current rules. So get rid of those purple and what were they, white objects, or put them in your Golden Age box. But anyway, the new thing here is that you can play any mix of standard or special objects, any mix of light or heavy objects. So now you can play 3 straight up heavy objects, 3 lights. If you basically anybody can pick up a light object now, so that's an inherent ability. So there's no reason not to play objects now, and they don't hinder movement, at least light objects. So I think that's really cool and really fun. You can also play all special objects. Now special objects are unique, so you can't play the same one, but you can actually play like the weapons drop, the symbiote, and the pim particles. So that's going to be pretty cool. And we're going to be getting, I think, a lot of other objects, which I think is really fun. I think objects add to the game complexity without creating as complex elements as resources. And with the Mighty Thor set, we're going to be getting a lot of cool stuff like that. All right. So one thing to point out here that I thought was really cool and interesting was that super strength now allows you to pick up heavy objects. Now before it allowed you to hold and pick up heavy objects, but now super strength allows you to pick up heavy objects. Why this is important is because if you get outwitted and you're holding an object, you don't drop an object. So at least if they want to outwit your super strength, you're not going to drop the object. You get to still use it. Now you would not be able to get the knockback from having super strength or pick up other heavy objects, but if you're holding one, you still get to use it in an attack. So that's pretty cool. Yep. I just want to make sure here it says you can use it in object attack or just continue to hold it. And I guess you can still put down the heavy object if you want to. You just can't pick them up. So that's kind of cool. I like that. Because outwitting super strength was always a little strange, but whatever. It is HeroClix. All right, so moving on to the next one. This is just pointing out that heavy objects are not dropped if they don't get can't used super strength or even pulse wave. So they are only dropped if you lose super strength. And lost and can't use are now kind of different things. Can't use is kind of like a temporary thing. Lost is usually like a permanent thing. Lost is like the power is gone. So if the power itself is gone, then you have to drop the object. So I think that's a really important change because that's different than how it functioned before. Because outwitting a power essentially meant you didn't have it at all. But now can't using a power is kind of like a temporary thing. It's like you can't get the benefits of that power in some ways. Like you can't use it, but you don't lose it as a possessed power anymore. So Another big change here is that you can't carry and hold an object. So Superman cannot carry Lois Lane and also hold that, humongous tank that he wants to smack somebody over the head with anymore. He has to attack with the object or hold the object or carry a character. So this kind of, makes it that, it's more thematic because oftentimes you're not going in for that big attack while you're carrying somebody, but that's not always true. Like, there's plenty of comic scenarios where teams are attacking somebody and slingshotting one of their teammates to attack too. So it's kind of sad, but it is what it is. They're trying to make it more simplified in that case. But yeah, if you're going to have an object, you cannot carry. They've created these two new objects, close object action and range object action, which are used to make attacks. No change here really. It's still +1 damage for a light object and +2 if it's a heavy for a close attack. For a ranged attack, it's now just a flat range of 6, so that is different. It doesn't matter whether you're using a heavy or a light, it's just 6 range. You get 2 damage if it's a light or 3 damage if it's heavy. So now every character, can basically pick up a light object and throw it 6 range. So even if that character has 0 range, they get a range value of 6 and can do 2 damage. So I think that's cool. A lot of little characters out there, a lot of support characters you think are only there to do the perplex. Well, they can actually hit, with a range value of 6. It can surprise some people. Another thing that's changed here is that previously, if you had an object and you attacked somebody, you had to use the object in the attack, unless you dropped it. Now that is different. You may continue to hold the object as long as you want, and I think this is great. And this has always been those weird things. It's like, why can't I choose when I want to use the heavy object? And now you can. So you can be given other kinds of close or range actions while you are holding it, and it doesn't remove the object or deal the extra damage until you want to. All right, moving next into powers. There was some discussion on some forums about special powers and whether or not they're considered as part of that combat value in the dial that they're on. Another good example is this Chase Green Arrow who says you can't use defense powers. So like the Chase Green Arrow, hit characters can't use defense powers. So when he hits, for example, Bizarro Green Arrow from Joker's Wild, who has invuln on his first click, he also has 2 stop clicks that are also in the defense slot, and those stop clicks are special powers. As far as I'm aware of, and what I would rule it as, is that it's saying here special powers have a corresponding black bordered white square and are of the same combat type as the combat value they surround. So anytime that they're saying defense powers, they're not talking about defense powers in the pack. They would have to say standard defense powers if they included all the powers. They're saying defense powers, it means any of the defense powers in that character's dial. And special powers are considered that combat type. So that would mean that he couldn't use his stop click. Bizarro Green Arrow in this situation, if you hit him for 6 damage or something like that, he would go right through and kill. It would one-shot Bizarro Green Arrow. So I think that's how it was worded, and that's it's important to know that, because when you see special powers, you might think they're not defense powers or attack powers, but they are for all purposes if they refer to other powers, like if they refer them by type. And there's another rule here that we'll go through that will outline that a little more clearly. All right, next we're going into abilities. I just thought it was cool that they compiled this list of abilities: trait abilities, improved abilities, which are like improved targeting, improved movement, team abilities, which they also modified, that we will do a quick video on too. Key phrase abilities are on the powers and ability card. There are certain key phrases like flyer or flight, indom, colossal stamina, giant reach. Those are key phrase abilities. And then inherent abilities are the ones that we talked about, like being able to do basic move, close range actions, being able to carry, close destroy, range destroy, object pickup, that kind of thing. Those are inherent abilities that every character has. Now, it's important to point out here that any ability that does not fall into one of the categories is assumed to be a trait ability. So I'm not really sure what that pertains to right now, but might be something useful to look at later. All right, next page here. power and ability use and durations. So this is some pretty complex stuff here. So basically, they're pointing out that all the powers are now, if a power or ability is given to a character and it's visible through the combat dial or through any ability, they're allowed to use that ability. So they aren't really like possessed as they were before. There's just one kind of way for our character to have powers and abilities, and that is through the use ability. So the other thing that they want to point out here is that if there's a special power that allows you to pick a power, like Jakeem Thunder or Al Jordan or Nico Minoru, the chosen power or ability is not something the character can use until it's chosen. So there might be some other effects that say, if the character can use hypersonic speed. Well, even though Jakeem can pick hypersonic speed, until he picks it, he doesn't use it. So that's an important distinction. Here's a good example. It says the power says that Outwit. So the other example is that when they can pick to one or the other, there are a lot of new characters now that say that they can use Outwit or Perplex. If another effect says if they can use Outwit, they cannot use Outwit or something like that. They have to actually pick that they used Outwit in order for that effect to trigger. It can't be something because essentially they don't use it until they pick it. So that's the clarification there. All right, so this area here, I wanted to point this out because there have been some times where, if a power or effect is worded and it doesn't specify a duration, you wonder, well, how long did this get to happen? Does this get to happen for the rest of the game? So what they're saying here is that anytime there is no duration and a trigger effect happens after, say, an attack or move, or it says when this character attacks or when this character hits, it's saying that after the action resolves, it goes away. And this is an example down here. It says, for example, when this character makes a close attack modified +1, it expires at the end of the first attack, even if it doesn't explicitly say for this attack. So this is definitely one of those little gray areas, but just as you move forward in this game, learn that unless it specifies a duration, as soon as that action resolves, the thing goes away. Unless it's specific, unless it's a trigger, like if it says adjacent characters modify damage +1, then that's a passive effect. So you have to be next to the character, that kind of thing. But anytime it has when this blah blah blah, then it lasts until the character finishes the action. So all right, let's move into stopping effects here. So this is where they're trying to clarify the difference between lost and can't be used. So powers and abilities that are lost or can't be used, there are three things that happen here. So whether they're lost it either through being off the map, or they no longer have the power on their dial, or if it's can't be used through some Outwit or other method of can't be used. Those powers abilities cannot be activated with an action, so they can't reactivate that power. They can't have any effects trigger from that power. So like if it says +1 adjacent characters, or +1 combat values or something, those effects don't trigger any effects, no passive effects whatsoever. And this is that's why they're pointing out they cannot have their passive effects applied. So if that power ability doesn't have a duration, then all effects of that power or ability immediately end. So now Barrier and Smoke Cloud are examples of how they have given them a duration of until your next turn, even if this is lost. So those get to persist regardless of whether you outwit them or not. So another interesting thing is that, like, if they lose the power, I would, and this is an example, I think, of like Flurry, where, if you took a Mystics and you lost Flurry, why you would continue to be able to do the Flurry is that you've already activated the Flurry. So you're in the middle of the action, you get to continue that action. Here in the example, it says for example, power says power, make up to 3 close attacks. If a character either is healed or damaged during the first attack onto a click without this power, the action continues resolving, and the character is able to make 0, 1, or 2 more close attacks. So that's important because so much stuff sometimes happens from being hit or attacking a character. You get to continue your action. So the other point here is that they point out tokens given to HeroClix characters or markers placed on the map are not normally removed when the effect that placed them is lost or can't be used, or if the character goes off the map. A good example is like the slash markers or the web markers that are given, like the Clix effect styles. I had a question about this a long time ago. It eventually got cleared up that they do stay even if they're off the map, but there was a lot of rulings and about how if the power was no longer on the map at all, then the power, then the effects of that power no longer happen. But it's saying here that if their markers are on the map and the card says what they do, and it says how to remove it, it doesn't matter if they're lost or if they're not on the map anymore, they remain in play. Specifically saying that the effect that placed the token or marker tells you when and how to remove it, and that remains. All right, going into lost powers in a little bit more detail. I think this is a good example of the difference between lost and can't use. It says in here, if a character has standard perplex, a brown square in a damage slot on its dial, and takes 2 damage, and clicks its dial 2 times, and the resulting click has standard perplex, the power is not lost. So for example, if this character had perplexed and it had perplexed its defense up from a 17 to an 18, and then he takes 2 damage and it, he lost his perplex during that time, and then he ends up on, let's say, 17 defense again, the perplex actually stays. And that's where perplex is slightly different, but also they're pointing out that the power doesn't get lost and then he has to activate it again. It just it's only lost if it's not showing on the dial. So it says this is true even if the click in between did not have standard perplex. So that is definitely new because right now anytime you took damage, the perplex went away. Now you get to keep it. All right, so as part of the difference here between can't use and lost, this part I thought was important to point out is that they say that if the phrase even if lost, allows some powers or abilities with durations to persist even if the power or ability is lost or can't be used. So that means if any power that says even if lost on it, even if you outwit it, it continues through the duration that it was given. If there is no duration, then it immediately ends. So it's important to distinguish that because there are going to be some powers that say until the beginning of your next turn or until they pick again or things like that. So even if you outwit those powers, they get to continue to be used. And I think that in some ways that's kind of more confusing because it makes outwit it's cool in that it's not like necessarily the protected outwit, which works, but it allows those durations to last even if they can't activate it again. So as long as it remains outwitted, like next turn, if you outwitted it the power 1 turn, the next turn you wanted to try to use some power again, you couldn't use it again, but the duration continues. So it's kind of confusing that way, but we'll have to just play it out and see how that works. It's saying that even in this case, even if the power is lost or can't be used, the duration of the effect does not end until the effect still applies. So, and then anything that says duration for the rest of the game, it's assumed to have even if lost. So if somebody had a power that says give them a free action and for the rest of the game they get hypersonic speed, and then you say outwit, I'm going to outwit the hypersonic speed. According to this statement, the duration overrides the outwit. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know. We won't be able to know until we get more characters that have those kind of durations. And because this outwit is new, usually those kinds of things were on, traits that couldn't be outwitted and stuff, but now that you can pick any power the character can use, it could become an issue. So Now we're going to move into powers and ability concepts and terms. I know this is kind of like definitely like you could take a class on HeroClix for sure. And this is like your textbook. It's pretty in depth. It's definitely more in depth than the first rule book. And I would even say, beginners, new players. I don't think the new rule book is all that much easier for new players. It's still a lot to digest. I definitely think the little starting players book is a good way to start, and then, slowly dive into this book, because this book is pretty complex. I have to admit, it's not easy to digest. So, this is the named tokens, and so area, and this is I wanted to point this out because there have been some, arguments or disagreements or questions about whether if you have multiples of the same character and they generate tokens with named tokens, for example, the Namor from the Civil War prize kit. There's also like Overdrive, who generates a vehicle, or Gertrude, who generates Old Lace. Anybody that generates tokens or bystanders. What's important that they point out here is that the name tokens are always specific to a character. So, if you have 3 overdrives and you you can still generate 3 vehicles, because each vehicle applies to that one overdrive. So it's important when they refer to that character, like if a charged up has not been created this game, they're referring to that character. Specifically, it says name tokens are always specific to a character, even if other tokens in the game share the same name. If more than one character gives the same named token, you have to require to track that named token. So you have to know which goes to which. A lot of people will put stickers on their Gertrudes, or stickers on their vehicles and characters so that you can keep track. Some people have cool like colored rings, but if you're going to play multiples of characters, you have to be able to keep track of which one's which. Especially even like SR Green Lantern, if you put a light wall marker up, you need to know which light wall was created by who. So make sure to keep track of that stuff. And here again it says, like named tokens generate game elements. Generated game elements are always specific to the game element whose effect brought them into the game, even if the generated game elements share the same name. So again, going into this example, you've got like a Rat King who's generating a bystander. If you have multiple Rat Kings, it says when this character is KO'd, KO all rat bystanders. You have to keep track of which Rat King goes to which rats, because you wouldn't KO every rat regardless of who made it. You would just KO the ones that apply to that Rat King who made it. So I thought it was cool that they actually pointed out all of this, because this was, this is an example of something that was never in the original rule book, and it gives them a nice framework for creating more bystander tokens and allowing you to play multiple things on one force. So now let's get into talking about the huge change here to replacing characters. Replacing characters are pretty much like anytime you have a shifting focus character, like shifting focus Deadpool, Superman from World's Finest, Batman. There's also shifting focus Punisher, and quite a few from the Avengers Defenders set. There's also replacement characters in Elseworlds and What If, where like Green Lantern of Gotham can be sidelined and then replaced with like a Batman or a Green Lantern. And there's quite a few of those characters. I think old merge characters are also replaced, but we're not going to talk about that now. We're going to mostly focus on modern characters. And there was some big changes here, because prior to the new rules, you could like equip a Deadpool, shifting focus Deadpool, with an Eclipso, and he would keep those effects of the equipment throughout the time he shifted. But now they've changed this so that the only two things here that remain on an replaced character is the action tokens assigned to the replaced character, and if the replaced character was given a costed action that turn, then the replacement character is also considered to have been given a costed action. Those are the only two things they list here, and they actually specifically say only the above two effects carry over. No other effects of any kind. That includes being carried or the effects of being carried. That includes perplex. That includes any equipment. And actually, there's some wording we'll look at later that specifically say that equipment on a character, if they've been replaced, the equipment is KO'd or unequipped. So here, like it says, no other effects of any kind that apply to the replaced character start applying to the replacement character. So this looks pretty specific, and this is something that I think they are trying to do. I think maybe to simplify having to keep track of what happens to a replaced character, and also it creates a little bit more maybe loopholes. But on the other side of the token here, if no effects other than the token and costed actions affect the replaced character, then this carry capability could be a little too OP. People on the, a good friend of the podcast, Jesse Cote, kind of pointed this out. You could totally, carry a shifting focus character with, let's say, shifting focus Doctor Strange, carry it like 12 spaces away, and then shift into another character, and it's as if that character wasn't even carried because it's a new character or a replaced character, and then that character could basically be given an attack or do whatever it wants, give it a costed action because it hasn't been given one that turn. So serious Alpha Strike capabilities, it's possible that WizKids is going to nerf this or at least correct this. And it is possible that this wording here, if the replaced character was given a costed action this turn, then the replacement character is considered to have already been given a costed action. It's possible because the way they word carry is that character cannot be given a costed action. They could maybe reword this so that it basically says, they can't be given a costed action this turn, or because carrying says you cannot be given a costed action. So they could definitely maybe modify this text to allow that to, or make it so you can't carry, which I think would be how it should work. But it does nerf, or at least weaken, the ability to combine equipped objects like the symbiote to any shifting focus character or replacement character. Now, one thing it does do, though, is it gives you a little bit of potential outwit protection, because if you can find a character, for example, like a Batman or a Green Lantern that has the same kind of powers on one turn as the next, one replacement figure as the next, then you could, even if you outwitted the character that's on the board, if you replace them and they have that same power, it no longer is outwitted. Same thing with perplex. If you perplex a let's say, Deadpool, perplexed his own attack up. Well, if he shifts again, the perplex actually goes away. But if he has perplex again on the new shifting focus piece, he could perplex again. It's as if he didn't perplex. So this is all a new mechanic that is available to you in the game to come up with cool ideas. Especially this shifting focus Deadpool with 34A through D, where he can perplex based on different keywords. Essentially you could perplex with one, shift into the, perplex with one, have that guy attack, and then shift into another one, perplex again, have that guy attack, that kind of thing. So he's actually able to use that perplex multiple times because he's considered kind of a different character. So just to go through the other replacement character restrictions, replacement characters begin on the same click number as the replaced character by default. And these are mostly the same. I just will review them real quick. The replacement character must occupy at least one square that was occupied by the replaced character. So if it's a multi-base, they have to occupy one. You may only replace a character that began your starting force or starting sideline. So they have to be on your starting force or on your sideline. A replaced character can't have the same name, same set symbol, and collector number as the replaced character. So I think all of these have to match. A replacement character can't have the same name, same set symbol, and collector's numbers. It's not or. So if they have different names, it works. Different set symbols, that works. Different collector's numbers. So, and then also lastly says characters that begin the game on your starting force may later join your sideline and then may become replacement characters themselves. So like if you essentially, this is actually really cool because I was wondering about that. Is that if you had a shifting focus focus, a single shifting focus, two shifting focus dead pools, you could actually only choose to sideline all the options once, and then when one is on your sideline, that can get swapped out for the other shifting focus dead pool. So, and they actually have an example here, by the way, of the perplex, that if you perplex a character and then replace that character, the perplex no longer applies. So there you go. And then later down the line, actually we'll look down at the later. In the replacement character rules, it specifically says that, well, actually equipment rules, it says that equipment is unequipped whenever the character is replaced. So no more symbiote, no more pin particles on a shifting focus or a character you're going to replace. All right, here we go into victory points for replacement characters, and this is an important one because there were some instances of people replacing a character before they died with a lower point value, and then having that guy KO'd and kind of sort of point denying the other team. Well, they fixed that. It says when one or more characters replace a character and all of that character's replacement characters are KO'd, score victory points equal to the point value of the replaced character. So you still always get the replaced character's KO points, but unless the total point value of the KO'd replacement character is higher. So so now it's just saying that you score points equal to the point value of the replaced character unless the point value of the replacement character is higher. So you can never score lower than the replaced character. So that's an important distinction because I know that some people had been playing it differently. So that's in the rules there. So let's talk about theme team probability control here. Not a whole lot's changed. There's a maximum of 5 theme team probs that you can get on your team now. It's still based on the number of characters with the keyword on your force. So of course no bystander tokens. And the characters and when to use theme team prob have changed a little bit. Of course they have to have the chosen keyword. And then they have this new addition that says must target a character other than itself. Now in the old rules, actually I think you could, for example, do a free action breakaway and then give your character an action token to prob that breakaway rule. I don't think there was anything that prevented you from using it on yourself, although you wouldn't really do it a lot because you are usually given an action token and you can't give another action token. But with these new rules, you definitely cannot target anybody else. You can never target yourself with a theme team prob. You have to do it on other characters. And then also it says must have 0 or 1 action tokens and immediately is given an action token. So now at least what they've changed is that because it's just an action token, it's not a costed action. You can attack, like one character can attack, and then that character can actually be given a theme team prob, another action token that turn to prob another character, and that is new. So you don't have to keep track of whether you were given an action token that turn or not. You can do it pretty much at any time. You just can't give them more than you can't give them another action token if they have 2. Obviously, that's definitely one of the golden rules. So. They list 5 kinds of additional game elements, and this I think kind of tells you the roadmap for HeroClix. I think a lot of people were worrying about whether resources were going to be totally gone, whether ID cards were going to be totally gone, although we got the announcement that X-Men are going to have ID cards, which I'm super stoked about. And that might be why they're getting rid of real names, because it's just too complicated to try to include all those other characters in the real names. But they are doing ID cards, special objects, equipment, and resources. So resources are going to be sticking around, and it could be they're just going to tie resources to vehicles and that kind of thing, like the Quinjet, but they might also release characters that have resources like Supreme Intelligence. My feeling is they're probably never going to do any major resources anymore, like the power batteries and stuff, just out of complexity, but you never know. I think they're leaving it open for that. And then lastly, they have this new one called Special Terrain, which they've released the Invisible Jet and the Boxing Ring. And so far, those have been kind of cool and fun. They've definitely had a little bit of an impact. Well, Boxing Ring has definitely had an impact on the meta game, so we'll probably see some more special terrain. Down here at the bottom, about special objects, I just wanted to point out again that all special objects are considered unique, so you can only play one on your force. Another piece of clarification here on equipment is any, of course, and this is in regards to characters that are equipped as well as equipped objects. It says here if an effect causes an equipped, so obviously equipped characters, any equipment has to be done to a standard character. That means no micro size, no giant size, no vehicles. Of course, with characters like Mixie running around and other characters that can change their size, like Al Jordan, prior to, I think there's a good clarification here that they don't lose the equipment. Like the equipment doesn't get KO'd or anything. It says here if an effect causes an equipped standard character to become non-standard, they stay equipped, but they can't use the equipment's effect ability. And this was in the Win forums at one time, and they actually put this in the rules. So this is good for everybody to be able to reference. Also, secondly, if in case people are wondering about whether you mind control a character who has like Eclipso or Symbiote attached, whether you would be able to get to use the benefits of that equipment, you cannot. It specifically says that when an equipped character joins the force that isn't its starting force, like such as mind control, they cannot use the equipment's effect ability while it's part of the other force. So that's an important ruling that hope that is in the rule book for us to rule on, but might come up in the game, especially with a lot more people being mind controlled. So the last piece here we need to go through, I think, is that's not on this one. We're going to go through that on the comprehensive rule book. So that's it for the core rule book. So WizKids also released a comprehensive rulebook supplement, which is recommended for judges and people who want to get into the more higher level elements of the game. Now, there's not like a whole lot of nitty-gritty here. There are just some clarifications that I think they didn't want to put in the core rulebook because it might confuse regular players. So definitely don't really use this rulebook unless you already know how to play and you're trying to figure out an answer to one of your rules questions. But it's kind of cool that they have this, and hopefully they will follow up with having more comprehensive rules. This is obviously something you're not going to get in a starter deck. You'll probably can only download it online at HeroClix.com/rules. But we're going to go through some of the items that I thought were kind of interesting and definitely things that might change the game as we know it. Starting here in the beginning, let me get my little magnifier out. Talking about character cards. We had some questions about this at a recent ROC States. They are specifically saying that some game elements do not have individual character cards, such as bystanders. For example, Old Lace doesn't have a separate character card. It's actually on the card. Or, what else? Well, there are some bystanders that technically don't have their own individual card. So basically it's saying an effect that instructs you to place an item on their card, such as a token or object, is simply indicating that the item is placed off the map and that the character has it. Oh, this is specifically talking about like if a symbiote or an item gets equipped to a character. They're just pointing out that even if the character doesn't have a card, you can still use that technique to equip or have the item or marker be on that character. It doesn't require the card to exist. So I think that's kind of an important point to use in a higher level game. Moving into this area of the sideline, it points out that after the game begins, your current sideline has no limit. So during a game effect, some effects may add more than the maximum number to your sideline. So once you have your game and it begins, there are characters that actually are going to potentially bring in characters from into your sideline from outside the game. And actually, I think the Mighty Thor set has these new Eternals that have a new mechanic called Sideline Active. And you can see here they have, you may not use the powers or abilities of any game element on your sideline unless an effect specifically states that can be used. Typically the effect will use the Sideline Active key phrase. So this is a new exciting element. Before we had characters on the sideline, they could be called in by ID cards, replacement characters, but you could never use any of their powers or effects. So now they're going to potentially give you some Sideline Active characters, which is I think a little bit like Magic. I don't know Magic that well, but that allows you to kind of maybe pick and choose certain things you can do with your sideline characters outside of just calling them in. So that's pretty cool. All right, down here, there was I'm pretty sure this was a change in determining victory points. Because I've played a couple games where I defeated all the characters on a player's force, and they had 3 ID cards that they didn't use, and the judge ruled that I didn't get those points. I'm pretty sure that's the current or old rules, is that if the ID cards don't get used, you don't score the points. But now, determining victory points, it specifically says when a player is defeated, KO and score all remaining game elements on their force. You don't KO the sideline characters, but you KO the ID cards as they're starting on the force, even if they weren't used that game. So that's an important point. Those are points that could help you in an important tournament. So anytime you win the game by defeating all the players or all the characters, you're going to get all the points on that force, period, even if they weren't used. So, all right, moving into the actions here. There was some, I think I mentioned this in the other video on the core rules, but anytime you have a power where it allows you to get it as a free action, and you potentially have that power still as a power action, anytime you have the same thing and it's a different action type, they're specifically saying you get to use it again. So here that says if a character has both Smoke Cloud as a standard power on their dial and a special power that says Smoke Cloud as free, they may use Smoke Cloud twice that turn, once as a costed power action and once as free. So that's pretty cool. It's going to be very rare, and most characters aren't going to have barrier on their dial and then also like a special power that gives them a free action barrier or something like that. But it's important to point that out, that if you do find that, as maybe they're going to build this in for a reason, that could be very powerful, being able to do the same power twice. So keep an eye out for free and actions that are still on your dial, or powers that are still on your dial. All right, moving into the next area, we're going to pass through triggered and passive effects. This area is pretty wordy, and gets into, if you're ever in an argument with what triggers first and that kind of thing, what happens, definitely look that up here. We're going to move into attacking. The area that I wanted to point out is this new kind of definition of a KO area, and this is where characters, when they're KO'd, you put them in your KO area. And this is great. I mean, this is an example of how WizKids is really kind of breaking down this game, creating zones, creating triggered effects. I mean, they definitely are leaving less of a gray area for what happens to things, and that's a better framework for a game. So in this one, it says KO area. If an effect allows you to generate a game element from outside the game and you don't have any more physical copies, you are allowed to remove them from the KO area and use that physical piece again, noting its previous KO. So I had a question about this before, and it's always been a little vague. I mean, maybe some judges always allow you to do this, but I don't know if you are in a big tournament. Like, for example, the Chair Devil or the Black Panther from the Avengers Defenders can create Wakandan warriors, right, from outside the game. Oh no, sorry, it is Daredevil. Daredevil can create ninja warriors from outside the game. So a good example is if you only have one. I mean, maybe you pull this in sealed, you pull one and you pull the Daredevil. If that guy gets KO'd and then goes to your sideline or KO area, you get to pull him in from outside the game. You don't actually have to sideline a whole bunch of guys or pull them from you don't have to actually have to have 10 ninjas waiting for you. So I thought that was kind of useful knowledge for sure, especially if they're going to be playing more of these outside the game figures. So moving along into this area of line of fire. Sorry. All right. This is something new. Basically, when you move through and destroy two walls, let's just say, basically an intersection. So you've got walls and you decide to move through the intersection between the walls. It was before that it would destroy both those walls. Same with targeting, although targeting was a little different because I'm pretty sure you had to target the middle of the square, but if it went through multiple walls and it went through an intersection or something, then it would destroy both walls. Now they're specifically saying that when doing so through an intersection of two sides of blocking terrain, you choose one side of the intersection to destroy. So they are limiting your destruction of the terrain. You have to pick one. You don't get to destroy both of them. Yeah, especially with a move through, which could be sometimes helpful with, like there was the shield Hulk, Superman, BVS Superman, who could destroy blocking, and if you wanted to get rid of a lot, you could just go through intersections, and you can no longer do that. So something to keep note of. All right, moving into these powers. This kind of goes along lines of clarifying again that chase green arrow that says that you can't use defense powers. There was some discussion online and in forums about whether that would cancel out Pika powers, and they did actually rule that, I think, in the win, that it didn't get to it basically got around. It can't use powers that were not on the dial. And so I wanted to point out that this specifically tells you this here now. So it says some effects refer to attack powers or speed powers. These are like a class of powers. This refers to powers that are displayed on the combat dial in that particular slot. So if an effect, messed that again. The example is an effect that says a character can't use defense powers, and they're using the specific words from this chase green arrow. It means that character can't use whatever power is in their defense slot. It does not mean that a character can't use a standard defense power like toughness if they have it from a trait. If this dial changes, they still can't use whatever is in that slot. So as long as it's a power in that slot, it could be any power. It could be a power, like for example, Chase Green Arrow says they can't use defense powers until your next turn. So that means that whether that dial changes the entire round, whatever appears in that slot, they don't get to use. That doesn't mean that it affects anything that either they picked or anything that they're getting off equipment or resource. So it's not the same thing as, an Outwit. Now, another thing they point out here is that it specifically refers to, defense powers, speed powers, attack powers. If they ever say standard attack powers or standard defense powers, then that does include all the powers within that group of powers that could be on the pack. So that's a very important distinction. They even give you an example here because we talked about being hit. So like it says hit characters can't use defense powers. I think that they actually ruled that you couldn't use you could use super senses because they were not hit yet. You don't determine the hit until after the super senses is rolled. But I don't know. It says here an effect that says a character can't use standard defense powers means that character can't use toughness, invuln. Oh, this is an example of the standard. So as far as Chase Green Arrow and super senses is concerned, I think that you would still get the super senses because you aren't technically hit until you could still evade and you don't get considered hit. So that triggers before the actual hit trigger resolves. So if you roll your super senses, then you still get all your defense powers. If you miss your super senses, you lose all of your defense powers. So one thing to point out, for example, is Bizarro Green Arrow in the competitive game. He has invuln on his starting click. He also has, I think we talked about this in the core rules section, is that, this would basically, if Chase Green Arrow hits him, it would, you couldn't use the invuln, and then if it is stop click and it kept going, he would not be able to use his stop click. So, all right, let's go into abilities here. This is a minor update, and think there was also some vagueness. If you notice, some characters have a optional trait where they have a little plus symbol next to the trait if you plus 5 points. I think there was also the Shredder clone. You could plus for the Ocean Resurrection, like instead of 75 points, you plus 10 to get the Ocean Resurrection. So what's important here is that it says specifically this additional cost can be paid only once and does not increase the game element's point value during the game. So even though you pay 85 points for Shredder Clone, And once he's on the board, he's still considered 75 points until he's KO'd. So when he gets KO'd, you get the 85 points for how much he paid. But you do not count him as 85 points when you're calculating, higher point value characters and that kind of thing, or mind control, that kind of thing. Although, just to mention that, I think did they get rid of feedback on mind control? I think they did. I don't remember talking about that. So yeah, there is absolutely no feedback damage on mind control now, which is great. It was one of those things that they removed multiple times anyway. So, all right, I digress. Anyway, those are the optional traits. Let's go into the next area I wanted to talk about. That would be off-the-map characters. So, off-the-map characters. So, basically they just wanted to clarify that some characters remove them from off the map. For example, if you pilot a vehicle, that character gets moved off the map. They keep their action tokens. They still clear their action tokens. They do take pushing damage. Even though they're not on the map, doesn't necessarily mean that they are not in the game or don't exist, or their powers. Now, usually their powers are not going to have a presence in the game if they're off the map. But I wanted to point out here that, and you have to look for that in certain characters, is it says any of that character's effects with durations that were activated or triggered before it was removed from the map continue and expire normally. So a good example might be, I have a character that barriers now in the new game, power action barrier. Somehow, I'm able, or free action barrier. Let's just use that as an example. Let's say, SR Green Lantern puts out his light wall marker, which is a barrier marker, and lasts until the beginning of my next turn. He can then jump into a vehicle and be off the map. Now, in the previous game, that light marker would go away because his powers are no longer kind of in effect. But it says any of a character's effects with durations that were activated or triggered before it was removed from the map continue and expire normally. So anytime that you have until your next turn, or even if this, that kind of thing, then those things will remain even though that character is being carried or, off the map. Definitely let me know in the comments if you think that might be wrong, because it's not like the power is technically lost. It says any of that character's effects with durations. So as long as they're activated and then they're off the map, it's not saying that they don't. It's not like the character is lost the power. Although they did have some. If we go back into our core rules, there was some discussion about lost powers and being off the map. So we'll have to take a look back at that again. It's not usually if it's not on the dial, but I think that is different. So anyway, let me know if you guys find any more information about that. I don't want to spend up too much time here on that. Let's go into the next area here, which is highest and lowest point value. They finally have, actually this is a very dramatic change to the ruling. It's actually, it does affect particularly characters that have an effect or trigger based on the highest point character. Example, Nick Fury, Balls of Fury, 56 from Nick Fury Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He gets a +1 attack and damage targeting the highest point character and penetrating damage. And a lot of people would play characters that were the same point value so that they never had to deal with that, which was a smart play. But now it says specifically that if an effect looks for the highest and lowest point character, that's a single character, then if there's a tie, the active player gets to choose one. So if I'm, Nick Fury, and if on my force, now I get to choose between the two 70-point Clarions, which one I want to get the, damage on, something like that, which is very different. Now, if there's multiple characters, then you still get to basically include both of the highest point characters or the multiple highest point characters, so that doesn't change. Moving here into effect limits, I think I wanted to just point out here is that anytime you see like a once per turn or once per game, that they're specifically saying that that is a duration that doesn't get affected by being off the map. or something like that. So let's read it together. Some effects restrict how many times you can use it. Typically it's once per turn or once per game. Oh, that's right. This is saying that an effect that can only be used once per turn or game can't be used by that character again. So this was actually a question about characters who have a once per turn or once per game, and what happens if they're mind controlled? Do they get to use it again? And it's specifically saying that they cannot. That character is still the same character, even if it's on another force. It cannot get the power or ability to use those again. Now, that's a pretty rare circumstance, but here is an example. If you use probability control to reroll an opponent's attack roll to mind control you, even if your character then temporarily joins your force, that character can't use probability control again that turn. So they're specifically now, yeah, so that makes sense because that character used probability control. Remember, it's once per turn, so it cannot use that. That character doesn't become like a new character. It's still the same character. So these are, I think in the previous rules, under mind control, because once it's changed to the other force, you were able to kind of get to, use prob. I'm not 100% sure about that because that very rarely happened, and mind control is not a very popular power in the game, but it might see some resurgence here. All right, moving into the next area of ability clarifications. In the knockback area here, this is one thing again that we pointed out I think in the first knockback pack rules episode, is that knockback now is optional. You can only choose. You can't just choose who you knock back. Like if you do a multi-target quake, if you knock back all of them, it's all or nothing. It's not like this guy gets knocked back but this guy doesn't. So I wanted to point that out. And we did confirm, of course, that now with the rule of zeros, and sorry about that, in my pack video I did say that you could carry a smaller size character with inherent carry, and you definitely cannot do that because the rule of zeros tells us a character with passenger 0 can't use the carry ability at all, not even to carry a smaller character. So that doesn't happen. And also like Shield Space Rig, it has a passenger 0, so it can never carry. All right, moving on to wild card and team abilities. If you already know, being able to wild card a team ability, I didn't go over that in the pack, but right now it is a free action. It's a free choose a team ability that a friendly character can use that isn't uncopyable. This character can use the chosen team ability until you choose again. So it is a free action. You have to choose to do it. Once you do it, you get to keep that team ability for the duration until you choose again. So if you never choose again, you get to keep it. And what it does say here is once chosen, the team ability copied by wildcard can continue to be used by that character even if no other friendly characters are able to use the team ability anymore. So in the previous rules, if your Sinister Syndicate guy got killed, and you had a wild card, you could no longer, obviously you could do that with Sinister Syndicate, that's a bad example, but let's just say, how about Batman Ally? You get stealth. So if your Batman Ally guy died and you had wild card, you could not get stealth anymore, but now, as long as you copied it once, it will last until you choose again. So that's pretty cool. I like that. All right, moving into special characters and bystanders here, I just wanted to point it out that some people had some questions about whether a bystander is clickable, because oftentimes, for example, the super rare Green Lantern, Zatara Green Lantern, that brings back resurrects characters, there was some discussion at the ROC states whether that could actually pick a click that the character was on if it was a bystander token and didn't have a click. So they do have a very clarified point here in the rule book that says a bystander's single click is considered its starting click. So it's good to have this ruling. They did have this in the clarification online on the win, but now it's officially in the comprehensive rule book. So it's good to have. All right, let's go into a little bit of detail on the vehicles. It's not that most of this is pretty much the same, but I think vehicles are a pretty big part of the competitive game, especially now that they're the only thing that really don't minus your speed when being carried. Renee Tilley does now. So does Vanisher. So even if you're carrying 4, you're minusing 4 to your speed. It's definitely not nearly as good as Overdrive still. But let's point out some of the restrictions and drawbacks here. Vehicles can't use the inherent object ability, so they can never pick up an object, and they can never use the closer range object actions. They can't be carried. Vehicles can't be chosen from Masterbind. Vehicles can't be assigned resources unless the resource is part of that vehicle's dial and card, like the PIM tank or the Quinjet, those kinds of things. Punisher van. Vehicles can't be given actions unless they have a pilot or have the autopilot ability. So let me stress that one again, because I've seen so many people, including myself, playing the PIM tank wrong. Now, granted, the PIM tank was really confusing because it had an autopilot version and a non-autopilot version. Well, let's just get this out of the way now. All vehicles, unless they have the autopilot ability, cannot be given actions, period. They cannot attack, they cannot move, they are basically dead weight without a pilot. So you have to give a pilot an action to jump in the vehicle, and specifically for the PIM tank, I don't think it even can be piloted. I think one of them says can't be piloted. So important to note. Or maybe, yeah, I mean, the autopilot one definitely can't be piloted. The other one can, I think. So anyway, so just remember that vehicles, you guys, if you're playing against somebody and they have the PIM tank or any vehicle, invisible jet, Punisher van, whatever, if they don't have the autopilot ability on there, they cannot attack with it, and they cannot pilot it. It can't be moved or anything. I've seen a couple people misplay that, and I feel bad for the people who didn't know about it. So try to remember these things. I know there's a lot to keep track of, but hopefully this helps you out. All right, vehicles also can't change size, and I don't know if this probably wasn't in the rule book, but Mixie, for example, can't pick the Punisher van and make it tiny. That kind of things. There are going to be more of those kinds of effects probably once we get more Ant-Man, Giant Man, or even Miss Marvel. So just be aware of that. Vehicles cannot change size. All right, going down into vehicles again here. There's quite a bit on vehicles. You should definitely read some of this. There are some other vehicle advantages. Most of these are the same. Can't be mind controlled, automatically break away. They don't modify their speed value when they use the carry, that kind of thing. What I wanted to point out, and they did. What's kind of cool is they detailed out that every friendly character gives this use of a power action to become a vehicle's pilot, that kind of thing, and be able to eject the pilot. It does say here specifically vehicles with a printed 0 attack value can bypass the rule of zeros and make attacks if their attack value is replaced. So because of the pilot attack ability, or it's a free action, and these have not changed, you can basically do a free action to replace the attack damage and range values. And unfortunately, you don't get to pick one, but you just have to take them all. And then also you have a free action to pick either a standard attack or damage power, and then the pilot can use it. So this gets around the rule of 0. So it's important for people to know. And then the chase Robin from Elseworlds, generates 2 vehicles. One of them has a 0 attack and 3 damage. If it does have a pilot, unfortunately, what I don't understand is still why they had the 3 damage. Because once you replace the attack value with like a pilot's, then they're only going to get the damage value of the pilots too. And so I thought it was cool that it could maybe destroy some blocking terrain in order to give you some way of getting in through some barrier. But in this case, if you replace it, it can still attack even though it has a 0, but you're going to have 3 damage to do that. So, all right. Let's see. If the character can use a standard power within a special power, the vehicle may choose and use that standard power. Okay, so that's pretty cool. It's basically saying that choose a standard attack or standard damage palette its pilot can use. So that's actually really important. it's saying any power that the character can use. So if that character, and because it's standard, it's saying it has to be like one of the pack powers. So you never get to use a special power unless it's a standard power. And in an example here, you get to use, like, if a special power says they can use Outwit or Perplex, and they've picked Outwit that turn, then you would be able to pick Outwit as one of the powers that the vehicle can also use. So some, very minutia type of information here, but it definitely would be useful when you need it. All right, so let's see. Moving on, a vehicle with autopilot key phrase is dealt the... Oh, I see. So autopilot, the vehicle may be given actions without a pilot, and when you do so, immediately after actions, deal the vehicle 1 unavoidable damage. A vehicle with the autopilot key phrase is dealt the 1 unavoidable damage when it is given any type of action. So this includes free actions. So it's basically anytime it was given actions without a pilot, not just making an attack. So that's an important distinction. All right, done with the vehicles. In the title characters here, I just wanted to point out again that they did kind of generalize the title characters' abilities here. Now it says, at the end of your turn, if the title character activated a plot ability but didn't make an attack, deal it 1 unavoidable damage. So it doesn't mention anything about the clearing phase anymore or clears action tokens. It says specifically at the end of your turn. Now there is some argument as to whether these generalized core rules or comprehensive rules are going to replace what's on the cards. My feeling is that for the most part it is in Modern. If you have a title character, this should override whatever the card says. Now they have said that in some instances the card is going to override these rules. So it's going to be kind of tough to decide. This is definitely going to be up for WizKids. Now this specific one doesn't change that much, but the Deadpool one was a little bit unclear, so this clarifies that. Real quick, in multiplayer games, which is obviously not a big competitive thing, but fun casual players play, it's really fun to play sometimes. It specifically says in Battle Royales that now they have to choose a map that is a square map. So I think that's always been more fair. They just have it in here in the rules that it has to be a square map now, no more 2x3s. So hopefully they'll come out with some more 3x3s and stuff like that, more Battle Royale maps. Okay, on to the very controversial topic of ID cards. So they did release generalized text for ID cards. As we know, we are going to be getting an X-Men ID card set coming soon. And so I'm super excited about that because I love ID cards. It's one of those elements of the game that give you more flexibility, allow you to customize your force based on your kind of play style, doesn't just limit you to what you have, and it allows you to play other characters in special circumstances. So I really like that. And so I'm glad that they're not doing away with them. But there are some big changes that they printed here, and the controversy is whether these changes are going to override all ID cards in Modern, or whether they will still kind of let you play the ID cards based on the rules of each card's instructions on the back. So let's go through this real quick. So other than picking ID sideline characters doesn't change. You still have to pick a character that matches. Well, that's not true. You still have to pick a dial or point value. So let's go ahead and read through this. ID cards show that a character on your force is a special contact. All right, we don't need to read that. They follow all sideline rules. When adding an ID card to your starting force, you must also add an associated ID character to your sideline. Okay, so it says here's the text of ID cards. Inspiration, a specific effect that varies from ID card to ID card. So things like +1 defense, adjacent characters get invincible, that kind of thing. There are some effects like opposing characters can't use Perplex. That would affect the entire team. But most of them have to do with being adjacent to the character, and this is also changed, and we'll go through that. All right, setup. Here's the big one. When you reveal forces, choose a character on your sideline whose name matches the name on this ID card, and turn it to a starting line. The old text says, Let me bring this up. The old text says, at the beginning of the game, choose a character on your sideline with a name or real name. Or real name is the part that they are removing, and it's actually in the comprehensive rules as a real name effect that they are getting rid of. So they are not going to base any kind of game effects on real name. So the big question is, on everybody's mind, was whether or not they were going to go with these new rules for setup, or whether they were going to kind of get rid of the whole real name property. And what they ended up doing is releasing a rules clarification, because in these rules it's very unclear. It doesn't say anything about allowing real name cards or past ID cards to work the way they did. But in the rules or clarification that they released, that I'm showing you right here, they talk about how the ID cards, the way that they're going to function is that they're all going to function the same. And what we mean by function is the call and help ability and the inspiration, which we'll go into next. The setup specifically is going to allow both. So it says that all ID cards are going to function the same. Old and new ID cards both have ways to match additional characters, but do it a little differently. So old ID cards still use real names. So you will be able to call in Cosmic Spidey with, as Peter Parker for Spider-Man ID card. And then new ID cards moving forward will use other character names. And they actually talk about something called other identities that they're going to list for future ID cards that will allow them to call in other characters specifically that WizKids can kind of make sure that they're not going to be broken for the game. They have more control over that than the real names. So I'm really glad and really happy that they released this clarification very soon, so that everybody doesn't have to have that question going into games before these new rules start, which will be when the Mighty Thor set releases. So also, any ID cards that use keywords like the Shield Level 7, Shield Level 1 are still going to be able to use the qualifying point values and keywords that they specified. So those will not change. So nothing really changes except for the function of the ID cards. The next one is call and help. Friendly characters now have power. If no other friendly character has been given this same action this turn, and this character is equal or more points, so that doesn't the equal or more points doesn't change, then the ID character, place the ID character adjacent. Then remove this ID card from the game and your opponent scores it. The character returns to your sideline at the beginning of your next turn. Immediately, if no square is occupied, is within 5 squares of this character. That hasn't changed either. Or it is removed from the map by another effect. Doesn't change. ID characters can't be carried, be equipped, be given double power actions, replace, or be replaced. So those are all the same. And it does specify very clearly ID characters can be KO'd. So the big thing here is that it doesn't have to happen at the beginning of your turn anymore, and the character that's calling them in can have one action token. So those are two huge changes for ID cards. A lot of times you were really limited because you could you call in somebody with one turn, and the next turn maybe you didn't have enough, you weren't able to call in, so you need willpower to do something. Now you could just keep calling in and calling in. You can only still call in once per turn, but you can still call in over and over again each turn. The other big deal here is that it doesn't have to be at the beginning of the turn, because we were all worried about the beginning of the turn phase making it so that you couldn't give a power action and you couldn't do free action TKO Jean Grey, because that would have to happen in the action phase. But now, essentially, everybody can TK and call in. Granted, you're still limited to the 6 range that they've added, but 6 range sidestep, you can still do a running shot. It's still quite a far reach with ID cards. So that's a big change. The other element that changes here is it says that when ID cards are placed on the map, adjacent friendly characters can use the ID card's inspiration ability until your next turn. So basically, they're making it so that inspire effects are a burst effect. What that means is that, for example, if you get a modify speed value +3 from the Flash card, or if you get invincible, and as long as that character is adjacent to the called in ID character, once it's called in, everybody gets that and it lasts until your next turn. So so as long as that ID card character still stays around, they don't have to be next to him, but you can walk away with your invincible. You can walk away with your +1 range and still get the +1 range or +3 attack or something like that. So that's what they're saying. An inspiration effect triggers when the character is placed. A friendly character that is later becomes adjacent do not get the inspiration ability. So as soon as you call in, you get the inspiration for all your adjacent characters. But later down the line, you at the end of your turn, you can't like move a character up to get the inspiration anymore, which was different because before, if you had a character adjacent to Superman to get invincible, you'd get it anytime you were adjacent. But now you only get it, and it like grants the use of that to the character as adjacent. So this is why there's a difference now between you can use a power. Characters that are adjacent when the ID character is placed can freely move away and still use the inspiration ability until your next turn, regardless of what happens to the ID card or the ID character. So scratch that, never mind. Even if the ID character goes away, or I assume that's what this is saying, regardless of what happens to the ID card or the ID character. So yeah, if the ID card goes away or the character gets killed or whatever, it doesn't matter. For the rest of your turn, you get to use those inspirations. So that is huge. That is big, big, big. You could give your whole team invincible for the entire turn, give them shape change the entire turn, give them, +1 defenses, +2 attack, that kind of thing. So that's really cool. So again, these are big changes to ID cards, and what I don't see happening, or what I think would be really counter to what they're trying to do here and simplify the game, is if they do let everybody just say, oh, just use whatever's saying on the card, use those, then it will be really confusing for us to play in a world where we have all different ID cards, and some of them can be called at the beginning of the game, some of them can be called if you have more than one action token, 0 or one action token. Trying to keep track of all that is going to be way more of a nightmare than trying to just laying down the law saying all ID cards are going to work this way. Lastly, like the whole idea behind Shield level 7 and Shield level 1, where they have a slight change because they are not unique ID cards, and they actually specifically say that some ID cards are not unique, so that includes the Shield level 7 and level 1. It bases the sideline character on the point value and the keyword, and I think they will still honor that text. So I just think if they make it so that some people can be called at the beginning, at the game, and some people can be called any time, that's just going to be way more confusing. So, all right, let's move down into this area of equipped characters and resources. The area that I wanted to point out here is if we do start getting more mind control and stuff like that, I wanted to make it clear that they're specific about, like if you have Professor Xavier mind controlling, let's just say he's mind controlling Magneto. Magneto has a symbiote attached to him as an equipped object, or even Eclipso or something. After he succeeds on the mind control, he doesn't get to pick a power. He doesn't get to use any other resource or equipped object's effects. While you only get the character. So it says if an assigned character joins a force that isn't its starting force, they stay assigned to their resource but can't use the resource's effects. So sorry, I guess this isn't equipped characters. I think this still applies to equipped characters, but it is specific to resources. So for example, if Supreme Intelligence was assigned to Magneto, you wouldn't be able to use Sidestep or any of the powers of that. Although in the new mind control, yeah, I guess it's not that important, because in the new mind control, you're just moving and attacking. But if a resource, for example, granted like +1 defense or +1 attack, or things like of that nature, +1 speed, or then yeah, that would apply. But so that's pretty corner case scenario. So there's this area here about special terrain, and they basically just point out how it's scored, if if you have to take out the entire force in order to score it, or if it's been destroyed. So also, special terrain down here says it can't be chosen by close or range destroy actions. So effects that don't specify special terrain can't destroy it. So basically, special terrain really can't be destroyed unless there's some special, wording on that. But we've seen a lot. We've only seen a little bit of play of like the boxing ring. Visible Jet hasn't seen a whole lot of play. It'll be interesting to see what other special terrain comes out. There's the Merc Jet, and they mostly kind of do sort of similar things. The Merc and the Invisible Jet, and I think they're kind of a cool game effect that doesn't really break the game, but gives you kind of like a slight benefit if you're building a team around it. So definitely let me know what you guys think about the special terrain stuff. All right, so I think that's it. They do have a little mention here of the past rules, and of course that there are going to be some rules that are on the cards that are going to override these rules. We'll just have to see what WizKids says about the ID cards and other things. So I wouldn't worry too much if you're really upset about certain things. You're just going to have to wait and see. But hopefully this video has helped you guys get an overview of what has changed. We probably didn't hit everything, but definitely get the starter set and buy the new Thor set, which looks absolutely amazing. It's coming out this Wednesday, August 30th, or Tuesday night. We're going to be filming some games at our local place, and we will be posting them to T3 Gaming's YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like this video and throw me a comment. I'm happy to answer rules questions as much as I can. I'll do the best I can to help you guys out, and share the channel with your friends. And again, there's a lot of great HeroClix content out there. Please support all of us content creators by watching our channels, subscribing, and keeping this awesome game going. So thanks again. We'll see you next time on T3 Gaming.